Hey everyone, and welcome back to From City to Country. I'm Kizzy, and this is my greenhouse. I'm just in the greenhouse about to sow some onion sets. I picked these up from a shop called Wilko in the UK, and yeah, I'm just gonna sow them in these trays because the bed that it's supposed to go in is not ready as yet. So I'm gonna start them in these trays and see what becomes of it. As you can probably tell, it's really cold today. I've got my puffer jacket on, and it's currently about 12 degrees. The lowest it looks like it got in here a night or two ago is -3. But we still have flowers that's still flourishing, and hopefully I can keep them going until next season. So I just wanted to come on here and have a chat with you guys about what's been happening around the world. There is a news article, a few articles really, that I saw in the past week or two, a lot more this week, just about, certain countries warning their people, or country I should say, warning their people about, stocking up on food. And that really caught my attention, and it should really catch the attention of everyone as well. Normally we have people in authority or world leaders encouraging against not, stocking up and panic buying and stuff like that. But here you have this particular country telling their citizens to, stock up. No one is sure why. No one can tell us why. But their leader told them to stock up. We don't know if there's going to be a food shortage, if that's why they're telling their people to stock up. We don't know if there's going to be some sort of crisis. We really don't know. I mean, the news article didn't really give us much to go by. Why is he telling their people to stock up? That's something we should really be paying attention to. When you have the rest of the world preparing for something, some unknown event to them, but according to what they've been seeing in the past 2 years, it's a very different time that we're living in. Very uncertain times that we're living in. And as Christians, we were told what was going to happen in these last days, in the closing scenes of Earth's history. We were also told how to prepare. It's the whole reason why we decided to change the name of our YouTube channel to From City to Country, to encourage others to move and leave the cities, because a city is not a place you want to be caught in during a crisis or when a crisis hits. Look at the Great Depression in history.
Nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
As Franklin D. Roosevelt spoke these simple and inspiring words in 1933, Americans from coast to coast, weary from years of economic hardship, were willing to take the freshly minted president at his word. He offered them hope, which was all that many people had left. The economic hardships brought on by the Great Depression had reached a pinnacle by the spring of 1933. On March 4th, an unprecedented event had occurred. Each and every bank had closed its doors. For some, this measure was only temporary, but for a large number, the economic crisis was a permanent reality. The banking system was near collapse. A quarter of the labor force was unemployed, and prices and production were down by a third from their 1929 levels. During his first inaugural speech, President Roosevelt looked over the tense crowd in front of the Capitol, anxiously gathered before him, and with unquestionable conviction stated, "This nation asks for action, and action now."
We were raised in the Sunset District of San Francisco. My dad had an office job, and like so many people in the prosperous 1920s, he was doing well. Then the Great Depression hit. My dad lost his job in 1930. His savings were depleted. We were forced to accept charity. The term welfare was not in vogue at the time. The procedure was once a week the Associated Charities of San Francisco would deliver boxes of food to needy families. We would watch as the boxes were brought to the men. At first, 1 or 2 families were getting aid, but as the Depression deepened, most of the families were receiving assistance. It was sad to see men selling apples on the street corners. Their clothes were old and shabby and usually consisted of a pair of old pants with a suit coat, trying to stay warm on a typical foggy day. We lost our house, a cottage at 1933 8th Avenue, which still stands and is presently occupied. Edward McSweeney, June 1994.
My grandfather used to talk a whole lot about the Depression, and he often stated that during the Depression that money was real tight. And I remember a story he told me about his oldest son. He said, if you do it right, living on the farm, you could always eat. And he said he didn't have to stand in the soup line, anything like that, because he was able to raise his own food. And also, he had plenty of cows and chickens and hogs for food. So he wasn't hungry, but some of the other things like clothing, his family didn't have many clothes or anything like that. They didn't have much money to buy them. And he stated that his son was barefooted and he wanted him to go to school, and he didn't have shoes. And he found a nickel, and with that nickel he went and bought his son a pair of shoes. My grandmother, she stated that she was mad at President Hoover at the time, and she felt at that particular time that the work she had to do wasn't much better than the work that her grandparents had to do, and you know, they were slaves, and she said that wasn't much better than slave labor.
The majority of the people that lived in the city were the most hit and suffered the most during the Great Depression. Those who lived in the country were more likely growing their own food. They were more self-sustaining than those that were living in the city at that time. And I really think that we should really take into consideration what's happened in history, because if we forget what's happened in history, we are bound to repeat the same mistakes. So I thought I'd come here and remind you guys that, look, time is not waiting for any of us. It really isn't. We as a family here, we're not exactly where we would like to be in terms of preparedness. There's a lot that needs to be done. Even though we are already in the country, we still have a lot to prepare in order to be more self-sustaining and not so dependent on the systems of this world. The world is a different place from when we first moved to the country back in 2019, back when everything was sort of normal. Now we live in a very, very different time. I wanted you guys to know that if you are still in the city and you are preparing yourselves and your families to leave the city, I would urge you to do so quickly. It's very uncertain times, like I said before. In 2020, if that's anything to go by, 2020 there was a lot of restrictions in movement and so on. A lot of people weren't able to move. There were still few that were able to move, depending on where you are, but there was loads of restrictions, meaning that not a lot of people could find suitable places because places weren't doing viewings anymore, or a lot of the places in the country or in rural areas were taken up. And now that the market is kind of more open and things are somewhat getting back to a normal and opening up, now is the time to really, really up your game in searching and preparing. Every day you should be searching on these websites, on these housing websites. Wherever you search for property, you need to start searching every day. Have a designated time of the day where you go to search. If you can, it would be wise to start buying long shelf life foods. It doesn't matter where you are in your country living journey. If you are planning to move and still in the city, or you've just moved into the countryside and you don't have your gardens up and running yet, until you have your garden up and running, you can buy food in bulk, like grains, for example, flour, nuts, dried foods like that, rice, etc. Just so that you're not completely in the dark. Should something happen during that process, when you do your food shopping, you should put some aside. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail, and we don't want that. Every time I hear news like this, it just encourages me to just sow some more seeds, and think and ponder and what I've just heard and what I've just read, or everything is just becoming so much more real. We're actually living in that time that we've always been reading about in the Bible. Sometimes it could just be a lot to take in. God in his word has given us a warning as to what's coming, and it should not catch us unawares. We should prepare ourselves in every way possible. A lot of people think that being independent of the system just means not taking, handouts from the government, like welfare money, or if you're in the UK, benefits and stuff. Being dependent on the systems of this world extends much more than just that bracket. If you are connected to the power mains, the power grid, you are dependent on that power grid. If that power grid was to shut down, if there was a blackout of some sort, you'll be dependent. Much of the appliances in your home will not work without power.
We are in the midst of what appears to be a colossal and history-making blackout.
People trapped in elevators and buildings. They have activated the emergency command center.
You're staggering, trying to take in as much information as you can.
Mayor Bloomberg's advice is to go straight home.
The subway system is down.
Ottawa is completely without power now.
The lightning-quick domino series of failures.
Gotta go to the bathroom and you can't even go nowhere.
50 million people are thought to have lost power.
In 2003, a massive blackout struck major areas of the U.S. and Canada and was perceived as a wake-up call for the nation.
We've got a real crisis in our grid, and this is why, despite being a superpower, we have a grid that is comparable to a third world country, and that's not right.
But have 10 years of planning and preparation left us better off today?
I don't think you can ever say with 100% confidence we won't have a blackout.
Electricity is really far more important than anyone realizes. We take it for granted, we flick the switch and it goes on, but it has to be in balance or the lights go out.
There has been a massive power outage throughout much of the Northeast, both of the United States and of Canada.
Millions and millions of people were caught by surprise when the electrical grid suddenly crashed.
It shut down 100 power plants, from Ottawa down to Cleveland and as far east as New York.
The most immediate concern was for thousands believed to be stranded underground in the dark in the New York subway system or in elevators in skyscrapers.
The attacks of 9/11 were pretty fresh in everybody's mind, and the first thought on almost every New Yorker that I spoke to's mind was, is this terrorism?
The police are saying that the evacuation procedures are working, people are calm, and that they are getting out.
A normal August afternoon had turned to crisis. Around 50 million people across the U.S. and Canada were left without power.
All of Cleveland's water supply runs on electric pumps.
My water commissioner said, the people in the Heights have water for 3 hours. I said, water? I thought the electric was out. He said, Mayor, how do you think the water gets from the lake to the people in the Heights?
You can get along in the dark, you can get along in the heat, but water becomes a health and safety issue very quickly.
It took 29 hours for the power to be turned back on in most major cities, but the brief outage contributed to at least 11 deaths and caused an estimated $6 billion in economic losses.
It still doesn't quite make sense to me that the grid was that vulnerable.
It's a big old system. When it started, you had a little local system. You had an electric power provider, a plant, a spider web of wires around the plant to serve customers near the plant. Then you put together a national system where you connect all those spider webs. It's grown up over a long period of time, and there just isn't one center or one organization or one entity that's in control of the whole system.
Massive blackouts continue to be a global problem. 15 million people lost power in Europe in 2006, 60 million in Brazil and Paraguay in 2009, and more than 500 million in India in 2012. Such events have fueled the imagination of TV writers, who have added their own twist.
It's going to turn off and it will never, ever turn back on.
This may be fiction, but former Senator Dorgan, who worked for years on congressional energy committees and recently wrote a novel speculating about a terrorist attack on the power grid, says the threat today is bigger than a few downed power lines.
We know from lots of anecdotal examples that the terrorists that use cyber terror are very inventive. They know that if they could bring down an electric power grid system, that would cause really maximum damage. This is a big, big challenge for our country.
The collective result of these kinds of attacks could be a cyber Pearl Harbor.
If you bring down the electric power grid system in this country and it stays down for any length of time at all, it'll wreck the American economy. So we've got a lot at stake, and we better keep our eye on the ball.
Anything electrical will be at the mercy of, you know, the power grid. That's where canning comes in handy. That's where growing your food comes in handy, and learning how to store it properly. Choose varieties that is, you know, that can store for a long time until the next growing season. If you would prefer to have your fridge, then having solar power of some sort will be very handy to have that setup. So that's something to think about. If you're already in the country and you're still, you know, you're still powered to the grid, that's not the only thing that makes you vulnerable to these disasters. You also have the water. If you don't have your own water, you'll more likely be powered to the mains, the grid, and that can also be a problem. Anything can happen. If someone switches it off, that means you are at the mercy of that, you know, particular system being operated by someone else. You want to be in control of the source of the water that comes to your home. So that's what I mean when I say being dependent or less dependent on the systems of this world. We want to be completely independent of it, completely, placing our trust back in God, and that is how it's supposed to be. You know, it's getting really dark and I'm losing a lot of light. If you keep seeing a light coming on, it's my motion light that's operated with solar power that's in the greenhouse. So anytime it doesn't have any movement, it comes off. That's something we all need to think about in terms of when we move to the country and being self-sustaining. We want to be in control of that. That way, if a crisis was to hit, you will not be affected by that as you would if you were still living in the city dependent on these systems. All this information might be scary to some, but God has told us not to fear. But in doing so, we must pray and prepare and do what He's asked us to do. In doing so, we show that, you know, we have placed our trust in Him and we believe His word and we act upon it because we love Him. We don't do these things because we fear of what might happen. We do these things because we love Christ, and our faith should be built on nothing less than Jesus Christ and His righteousness. And with that, I will end this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I know this is not the usual video that I make, but it's just been something on my mind and I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a nudge. We all need a bit of a nudge sometimes, you know, to get going. We need to encourage each other. This might be really dark times that we're heading in, and we want to encourage each other to prepare so that, you know, we can go through this together as brothers and sisters in Christ. And on that note, I will bid you a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care and God bless. Oh yeah, and I've finished sowing my onion bulbs, so I'm just gonna water them in and leave them in here to grow up until the bed for it is ready outside. All right guys, take care. Bye bye.